Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk Toku. I'm your host, Squall Charlson, and we have the episode that I've been maybe waiting for the entire season to do. I reached out to this individual to get this episode going because I knew that this would be such an electrifying and amazing episode. I'm here today with Jason Bischoff.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for having me on, Squall.
Hey, no, thank you so much for coming on. Like, honestly, your work in Power Rangers really kind of melds to what a lot of stuff that I wanted to do for a show like that or anything. And I feel like, when we met at PMC, there was a lot of, chemistry there. There was a lot of, similarities. And I feel like I could learn a lot from you, and everybody watching at home could as well.
Oh, I don't know about that. And I love that you've prefaced with chemistry. I felt it too. But no. Maybe as a preface, I do want to emphasize that I am just one small cog in a much bigger mechanism of amazing people that contributed in that time that I had the privilege to be a part of everything. So thanks for calling that out.
Humble too. But for anybody who's watching who maybe, doesn't know who you are, this is kind of, what we do with a lot of our guests, because sometimes there's not very much overlap. Some people may know Power Rangers very well, may know the people behind it. Sometimes, you have Koichi Sakamoto come on and everybody's like, oh, I know exactly who that is. So for anybody at home who doesn't know who you are, Jason, or what your history with tokusatsu is, could you explain that to us?
Oh, gosh, give me an hour. The long and the short here. I have been a Power Rangers fan since, honestly, before the series even premiered. For me, it actually started in the summer of 1992 when I saw the original Triangle Box 8-inch figures on the shelf. And it was really no more complicated than me having come off of a summer completely obsessed with Jurassic Park. And then seeing all of these dino-themed superheroes, nonetheless, one of which was named Jason, right? So I took a gamble. I bought the figure. Lo and behold, on August 28th of 1992, saw the series premiered. My life was completely radically different after that point forward. I was obsessed with Rangers, have consistently watched the series throughout the entirety of my teenage and certainly adult life. Entered the entertainment industry about 16 years ago. I've done both creative and business-oriented roles. In the winter of 2016, I received a call from a dear friend who was at the time working at Saban Brands, and they were looking to grow the department specifically from a licensing perspective. For those at home that may recall, that was right around the time we were getting ready for the 2017 Lionsgate feature film. And so came in, and the way I like to say it is that Zordon called and I answered. So I kind of gave it tenure in a major entertainment company, a major video game entertainment company, to go and work on something that had been near and dear to my heart for so long. And I was just extremely lucky for that opportunity, especially they come in at that time when there was just so much excitement and so much raw potential in the brand, and found a welcoming cadre of incredible creators and like-minded folks over there. And even though I had come in from a licensing perspective and was focused on a lot of just the business-oriented pieces and parts, kind of quickly became known as a little bit of an in-house expert, and a very generous production team invited me into kind of like the inner circle, if you will. And I got to advise on things here and there. And then ultimately, and we did all sorts of cool stuff. Let me be real. And it wasn't just me. Again, an entire team of amazing people, but we got to launch like the Boom Comics series, which really proved to be exceptionally additive to kind of the lore and the back end of Rangers, which was like a big hope and goal of mine having come onto the brand. And then independent of that, we got to ultimately, after about 2.5 years, really start to cycle some of these changes into the bigger franchise in whole. And roughly around that time, there was an acquisition, transfer of ownership between the licenses from Bandai to Hasbro, and then ultimately an acquisition of the brand to Hasbro. And so I was part of that transition team, and I actually ended up taking off my business hat at that point and putting on my creative hat. And for the better part of a year, I was the franchise creative director. So had a lot of fun. We launched Beast Morphers, and a lot of the stuff that I worked on is still coming out. And again, it's stuff that I worked on and contributed to, but with an amazing set of other folks. And so here we are.
Wow, that's a lot actually to take on. We talked with Melissa Flores a couple episodes ago, and
love Melissa.
She's great. She's wonderful. And it just feels like everybody, I believe at that time, came into a place, especially towards kind of like the end of, Saban's tenure with Power Rangers again, that there was a lot of people in place that really love this brand, who really have its best interests at heart. And I think like whether or not, whatever you think of the shows themselves, you know, they are there. Like, I used to work in elementary schools, and we would see kids running around with like Ninja Steel backpacks on, you know, Beast Morphers, like merchandise. And, you know, I haven't seen that in a really long time. And it was really those last few years that I think the Power Rangers name really came back into place. And it's because of your work. It's because of everybody's that were there at the time. And Hasbro's, you know, going to continue that, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, that's certainly my hope. You know, the way that I like to say it is I left it better than I found it, so to speak. And I'm just so grateful to have seen the community's excitement about some of the other lore initiatives that we had pushed through things like the comic series and Shattered Grid and Dimensions in Danger and some of those bigger moving pieces and parts that help kind of codify and concrete the bigger universe. And I know that stuff is going to just pay off for another 25 years. So super excited, super grateful to have been able to contribute like that. And here we are.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy because I remember everything surrounding Beast Morphers, everything surrounding the next adaptation of Power Rangers, which was crazy for the time. If you weren't aware, Power Rangers actually skipped a couple seasons when Saban rebranded everything and came up with the super seasons, because effectively you would have the same season run for 2 years, whereas Sentai does, you know, each year has a new installment. And so that created a couple of these seasons that were skipped, unfortunately. And where exactly did it happen that Beast Morphers, that Power Rangers was going to adapt Go Busters? Like, where did that start?
For several years, or at least a couple years before I joined the franchise in 2016, there was a floating pitch internally for an adaptation of Go Busters, right? And there was a lot of passion for that season internally because it was inherently, or I guess from its raw elements, it was very prone for adaptation, and it had a lot of additive elements that could have contributed to kind of those bigger lore pieces and parts that we had talked about. So there was a lot of excitement for it. To preface, though, when a season, or at least when a season was being adapted under the Saban era, when a season was going into kind of that phase of like, okay, well, where do we go next? What is the next show that we're going to touch upon? You know, there are a lot of factors that happen behind the scenes that contribute to that decision. And it's certainly by committee. And there's all sorts of factors that weigh in, not the least of which would be things like budget and the executive producers and the network that it's ultimately going to fall under, and the creatives that are involved, and the showrunner. And so it's kind of a chorus of people. And under the best of circumstances, all of those people are singing the exact same song at the exact same time in the right key. And in the worst of circumstances, it's the opposite, right? Gratefully, as we were going through the review process, coming out of what would have then been Super Ninja Steel, we knew that we were transitioning into a new relationship outside of Bandai, ultimately with Hasbro. And we knew that there were things that were going to be very important as we weighed that decision and what content was available to us. So one of the things that was very important certainly was kind of how do I explain this? The palatability of a season. So sometimes seasons can have a huge variety of complex themes or characters, or you name it, that could be very difficult for the core audience to digest, nonetheless, from a production budget standpoint, that kind of thing. So Go Busters really gave us an opportunity to kind of limit the cast. At the time, there were only 5 specific Rangers. We had all these cool additive technological elements in the B spots, and certainly kind of that evolved look of Grid Battle Force. Grid Battle.
Nice.
And then there were other pieces and parts too that were really attractive from a lore standpoint. So as we were looking across the board and we were looking at our options, it became a dialogue, and each part of the business got a chance to express what it is that they were looking for in that next season. And lo and behold, there was an opportunity to pull out that old treatment of Grid Battle Force, and, or I should say of Go Busters, and kind of brush it off and see if there was something interesting there. And in the room, as somebody who was privy to kind of being in the room when it happened, it was very cool, if only because you could see right away that lots of great options before us, but ultimately there was something about Go Busters that was particularly sticky and we thought there was something really cool about leaning into the Beast theme. So it had kind of a techie element. It felt very future forward. And on the same token, it felt like good old Rangers in that it was clearly thematic, and you could see the Beast theme in it and maybe even draw that out a little bit further.
Wow. It's crazy to think like how everything kind of has to work, together to make that sort of happen. But I'm really happy with Beast Morphers. I think that was probably out of everything the best choice, and it really has been paying off. It's been,
I'll definitely call to the fact that it was certainly one of my favorite Super Sentai seasons watching through it. I'm still in love with kind of the visual expression of that world. And I will honestly never, ever forget kind of one of the highlight moments of my professional career being in the New York Toy Fair room when we ultimately revealed it, and just seeing a number of our friends and fans and influencers like double take, looking at each other in complete disbelief and like pulling their hair, because they couldn't believe that we would have revisited a season from several years prior. So it was super exciting, and I'm very, very proud of the final product. It is, of course, a product, and that's one of the things that I do want to emphasize is you can go into any given season, whether it be Beast Morphers or otherwise, and it's really important that the at-home audience understand that for all of the same reasons that go into like choosing the next season, all those same voices and pieces and parts of the business that matter do weigh in on the kind of the development and then ultimately the back end product, right? So if there's stuff that you love about a season, whether it be, again, Beast Morphers or otherwise, great episodes or even great arcs or great seasons or whatever it is, celebrate that for all it's worth, because it took 1,000 happy accidents and lots of really incredible people that contributed to those moments or those broader strokes. That's all I'd love to kind of throw at that. But I'm very, very proud of Beast Morphers, and I think we're going to end on an exceptionally cool high note, and I hope it pays off for years to come.
Awesome. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know when this episode's going to go up, how close it's going to be to that,
Sure.
finale, but hopefully, it's close, because we're getting there. I don't want to date this episode, but
no, it's cool.
I think going to PMC 2018, where you and I met for the first time, it was electric. I was basically sectioned off in the back of their green room where they have all the Ranger actors and everybody else. We had like a little, curtained off area that we would bring our Japanese guests there, because I would record them for their interviews. And that was kind of the space that the director of the whole convention gave to me. And he's like, all right, you can be here, you got your badge, whatever. And it was so crazy because I had just finished one interview, ran to dump the footage at the hotel, and I came back, and there was this lady there, and she was, questioning me like, who are you? What are you doing here? Okay, well, no photos, no pictures. And I was like, okay. And I turn around, and before they were ever like introduced, they were the 3 Beast Morphers. And I was like, oh my God. And I could just feel that, just looking at them, how well that this team was going to work. And then they did their thing, and they came back, and you were there. Chip was there. Everybody was just kind of there, and you could just feel the excitement in the room. Like even Mike Chat, Lightspeed Blue, came in, and he knew a couple of them, and he was like hugging them, and like, oh, it was such a nice moment that no one got to see. And it was, I don't know. I think a lot of people don't, get to see those kind of moments, and you get to see how everything really does come together and how this is going to work.
So interesting that you say that. I'm going to add a little bit of color to that experience, right? So for us going into it, at least the folks coming in from Saban who had just transitioned into Hasbro, there was a lot of excitement, and we had kind of thrown together a gallery or a museum tour of all sorts of props from the history of Rangers. It just felt like this really cool cumulative moment, right? So the day before all of this, or maybe 2 days before, we had actually met the cast for the first time in the Anaheim area, in a hotel. And we gave them the full franchise 101 of like, these are all the grassroots of the the history of the show. And these are the things that people remember and what's really important about the brand. And these are the things that are probably going to stand out to you before you even go out to New Zealand, right? And we did all sorts of crazy stuff to set their expectation. And we even took their photos in 360. So like a lot of those things have spilled into the sculpts that you see in the Lightning collection today, that kind of thing, right? And that's why those sculpts are so great, is because we were there capturing it in real time, right? So it was just cool to see their kinetic excitement, and especially because we just didn't even know them at the time. We were becoming friends. And then over the course of 48 hours, doing these bigger reveals and giving them their moment and their time to shine. And for me, there's an image that's floating around on the internet. A lot of people have seen it. I think there's even like a boomerang or maybe even a short video. It's of Jackie, Rory, and Jazz, and they're upstairs and they've got their suits on, but it's like helmets in hand, right? And they're gripping each other's thumbs or whatever. And it's just this really cool team moment. What most people don't realize is just outside of frame are all of their friends and family basically just weeping. And I'll never forget just kind of being a part of it and loving on that cast, and just so grateful to have been there.
So I feel that we should get into kind of the bulk of what I wanted this episode to be, having you on. I foresaw this episode where on my YouTube I did this sort of video where I talked about what Beast Morphers, how I would adapt it, what it could potentially become. And it was so cool. Yeah. You got to see all these different people, you know, make their own ideas, upload them, and there was just so much creativity there, and it felt really cool to kind of see that kick off. And I thought this would be a really cool idea for an episode, and especially with you here. Would that be something that you'd be willing to do?
Oh, yeah, that sounds rad. Let's do that.
So I thought what would be a really good idea for our episode is if we covered Kyuranger. I got the poster, I got the shirt, I'm ready to go. What's wrong?
Squall, I don't know how to tell you this, man. Kind of hoping maybe we could talk about Kyuranger today.
I was gonna ask you because I see Kyuranger behind you, but yeah, we can easily do Kyuranger.
In fact, if you check your email here, I'm sending you a pre-recorded video of, I guess, what I would consider to be like my first pass on Kyuranger. Why don't you check your inbox?
You want me to like read this? Oh wait, no, this is a video. Wait, you actually did a whole entire video on this?
Maybe.
Oh, that's perfect. No, yeah, we can easily do Kyuranger. I just gotta delete everything that I had typed up here, and while we're watching this, I'll start formulating some ideas for Kyuranger. But yeah, we can play this, right? Okay. So without further ado, here is Jason's pitch for Kyuranger.
A disclaimer: the following presentation is for entertainment purposes only. It's fun for fun's sake. All of these ideas are solely my own, unless otherwise noted, and do not reflect the opinions of my former, current, or future employers. It's also really important that I stress that what you're about to hear is completely unrefined. These are just ideas in their raw form, unedited and unpolished by the magic of collaboration. This is, for all intents and purposes, a cold first pass. Built in a bunker, built on nothing more than bubblegum and the odd rewatch of a bootleg episode. Lastly, as a point of order, I am approaching this adaptation as I would any other if given the opportunity, with the target audience in mind. Power Rangers has always focused on 6 to 11, and sometimes 4 to 8 depending on the season. This pitch is not going to waver from that time-honored tradition. That said, I am actively choosing to focus more on that 6 to 11 crowd, in hopes of creating a show accessible and appealing to all ages. That's all the preface mumbo jumbo. And now, open your minds and open your hearts to a new universe of potential. This is Power Rangers Supernova. Insert generic, unhelpful, nondescript story paragraph here. It's a race against time. The monsters of the universe are organizing, creating a new galactic empire called the Monstar Syndicate. Their goal? To steal energy from the cores of living worlds in hopes of returning their evil emperor back to life. But one special robot has a plan to stop them by finding and training the next generation of Power Ranger heroes from across the cosmos. They are Power Rangers Supernova. Jason, that tells me nothing. Literally nothing. I know, right? It's just like the real thing. You'll have to tune in to find out more. I kid. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Power Rangers Supernova would be a dynamic action series focusing on the tenets of adventure, exploration, experimentation, diversity, and school. Yes, school. But I'm not talking about high school teens here. I'm talking about a hodgepodge Ranger Academy, or at least an ROTC-like program. For me, this would fall tonally somewhere in between Time Force and In Space. More the former than the latter. There would obviously be intergalactic travel and missions, but this is not a paramilitary group, or even a formally organized group. This is, at best, a series focused on misfits from across the known universe, forcefully banded together and figuring out that friendship, faith, and yes, some dynamically themed firepower can take down even the most dastardly of evils. Our series would begin in a destitute future, one all too familiar. Making no bones about it, our episode title would be something like The End of the Power Rangers, or simply The End. I would want the audience to immediately understand the stakes, and that the paradigm has shifted. This is not the same old thing, for as much as it will eventually fall into familiar territory. Across a war-torn landscape, with a multitude of ozone-burning laser fire in the air, a cloaked figure traverses a pock-marked battlescape. He dodges and jukes his way through incoming blasts, all the while taking his cues from a disembodied voice named Al. Our cloaked stranger draws close to a heavily guarded bunker, and as our eyes wander to his waistline, we see a Firebird-shaped sword materialize in his gloved hand. Shenanigans ensue, monsters are quelled, and the stranger burrows into the bunker. Under instruction of Al, eventually he emerges, holding a cylindrical canister the size of a small duffel bag. Along its edge, in progressive levels, sit roughly 100 handheld orb devices. These are our Kyutama. Through dialogue, we come to understand that they are called Nova Stones. Get it? Nova Stones, Supernova. The Nova Stones are the last best hope the galaxy has to push back the tide of Monstar invaders. It turns out, after 25 years of pounding sand, the monsters finally learned a critical lesson from the Rangers themselves: teamwork. Now united by an extremely powerful and charismatic figure, the Syndicate has planted and supplanted the four corners of the galaxy. Based on what's seen and inferred, it's also safe to say that what Rangers still exist are entirely overwhelmed, if they exist at all. And yes, for those deep divers out there, this is our original mainline continuity universe. My point, things are bad, but don't turn tail just yet. Let's dive back in. Turns out, the Nova Stones are mint off the factory floor Ranger powers, inspired by the very systems that have been conquered. They are a symbol, a sign of defiance in the face of impossible odds, and our Ranger Stranger is their purported shepherd. Conflict, strife, blah, we see our stranger eventually make it back to his ship, where we meet the face behind the name. This is Alpha 9. Now, before I get any belly aching that not everything has to be about MMPR, I want to stress that this is one of the few places you would see anything that sounded or rhymed with the original series. And I would introduce it here for a very important reason. An Alpha, who would resemble but obviously be an upgraded standalone version, would be just enough to hook lore junkies without being distracting. He'd also be super iconic to the franchise and immediately come in with a heart of gold. Kids love Alpha because he's a kid. Adults love Alpha because he's innocent and adorable and a contrast to villainy. I would personally love Alpha to be a part of this, if only to have someone with specialized knowledge, a MacGuffin to keep the characters of the show well informed and moving forward. Nevertheless, our hero and Alpha will make it out of their mission safe. That is, until they don't. It turns out Rangers clock pretty hard on the bad guy radar these days, and as soon as our masked stranger appeared, whether he knew it or not, he was doomed. Because this is where we meet our big bad, Zodiacs. Zodiacs is effectively a negative, black and purple version of Shishi Red Orion, maybe a little monstery on the edges. It's clear that whoever or whatever he is, he's powerful, Ranger powerful, or more. And he clobbers our stranger, who can do nothing but turn to Alpha and scream, "Run! Run!" Whack! Zodiac strikes the stranger along his back. Alpha freaks, holding the canister of Nova Stones. He starts to do as instructed, but alas, He stumbles in the confusion, maybe even in the shockwaves of Zodiac's attack. Whack! Zodiac strikes again. The stranger starts to go nuclear, if you catch my drift. Electric fire igniting his cloak, lightning bolts, that kind of thing. He's falling apart. All hope is seemingly lost, until by sheer grit, the stranger wills his death to wait a moment. In a Hail Mary move, the stranger throws the last of his life and energy into a Ranger-fueled rush toward Alpha, and then ultimately a super jump for both of them into the air. He pulls a golden framed stone of red from the container. Al, he manages, whilst coming apart at the seams. Do me a favor. Flick. The stranger activates the Nova Stone in his hand. Time, the Nova Stone replies, as a broken clock icon flashes. We cut to Zodiac's, watching this all from the ground. He leaps with impossible momentum towards our stranger, but is immediately blown back as boom! A massive pulsar of light erupts. Simultaneously, like an uncontainable firework, our stranger explodes into a titanic, flaming icon across the night sky. It's a phoenix. Zodiac lands and screeches in protest, "No!" And with that, we smash cut to our high-energy rock title sequence. Whew. Cut to modern day, and that terrible future has yet to be seen. Instead, we re-meet Alpha 9, completely cleaned and refurbished like it all never happened, along with the beginnings of what will become his Ranger team. This world, or rather, universe, will prove to be a stark contrast to our cold open, and that's the whole point. The past, rather, our present, is now armed with specialized knowledge and the battlements of the future, and it will be their job to stop the Monstar Syndicate from getting its act together. For 44-ish episodes, okay, 40 with 4 clip show-based adventures, we will see a colorful cadre of characters assemble from across the Power Rangers universe. Some will be deep, referential cuts. Others will be first-timers. But either way, everything will be presented like it is fresh and new. And it is this cast that will be the driving force of the show. All the intrigue and drama and conflict and comedy will come from this 12-person crew, because that's a lot of characters to service, and we needn't be distracted with what's happening planetside, at least not all of the time, because in this case, being a Ranger is a full-time job, like it was a full-time job in space. We're gonna see their civilian lives when they visit Earth and other exotic locations. I just want to set expectation that our academy, namely what's happening on the ship, would be the central location of all goings-on. As for what that cast would look like, I imagine a diverse range of human-esque, and suited alien creatures. Supernova Red, human-esque, Zybrian. I would play with the idea that Lucky might, in fact, become Zodiacs. Supernova Blue. Again, I would keep most of the character intact. There is something super charming about a fraidy cat wolfman who regularly pushes past his own fears to do his duty. Supernova Yellow. Let's nix the chef archetype and go with a writer-poet instead. Let's also make him a Christian. That seems to vibe with the swordfish symbol. Supernova Gold. I really liked Balance in the original show. I would maybe bump his thievery a notch and make him a bit of a ne'er-do-good scamp and gambler. Supernova Black. I love this Ranger suit. I think it's killer looking and kind of more Kamen Rider than Ranger. And bonus points, I think we could spin it body positive, kind of in the way we treated Jack from Hyperforce. Now, don't hate me, but I think I'm making this dude racially Machine Empire. There's something super interesting about the idea of the survivors of the Empire having learned their lesson with the UAE and not joining the Monstar Syndicate. Supernova Green. Let's introduce a new alien here. Something chameleon-inspired in the way that Cat Manx was referentially feline. Supernova Silver and Supernova Pink. Why am I bundling them? Because I think these should not only be our 2 Rangers from Earth, they should be faces we've seen before. Namely, Blaze and Roxy. Blaze and Roxy deserve their stint as Rangers. They've seen a lot and prepared for a lot, and I love the idea that a greater destiny was waiting for them amongst the stars all along. Lastly, I think there's just something so cool and so haunting in the idea of Blaze flying the Cobra banner, a reminder of his avatar's time under Evox. For this season, I would make that a big part of Blaze's journey, not only finding himself, but ultimately trying to make up and redeem that part of him that is unnecessarily guilty. Supernova Orange would be a Scorpion Man, of course, a new alien. I loved Stinger's spy archetype and his brother's keeper theme. Both would service us here. Supernova Purple would be something like Rompo, but in the way that Western Kruger was kind of its own thing. I would completely redesign him and make him Alpha's oldest ally, at least relatively to present day. Someone who's been searching for the Nova Stones for a few decades. Because, surprise, Al has been in our universe for at least 100 years, trying to fulfill the mission of our stranger. Turns out, in all the confusion and chaos, when the Time Stone was activated, Alpha and the contents of the canister were scattered. As a result, Purple would effectively be the headmaster of our academy, and I love the idea that he's a next-generation RJ, both in color and demeanor. Maybe all these years of running around in space has left him a little loopy. All right. Our final two, Supernova Sky Blue. Now, here's an interesting challenge, because it's obviously a child in the footage, at least proportionately. This might be my favorite casting, because, drumroll, it's Alpha, which feels like this super important full circle story progression for this line of characters. Mid-season or so, Alpha would discover that embedded in his lightning bolt chest was a backup Nova Stone all along. At last, and certainly not least, our stranger from the opening is, of course, the Phoenix Knight. Turns out this ranger has a very special suit power. He can't die, or rather, he can regenerate. Sure, his defeats are explosive, and maybe it takes him a while to reconstitute, but as seen in Kyuranger, I like the idea that he's been sleeping somewhere in the past this whole time, and eventually, and here's where that exploration theme comes in, our Supernova Rangers triangulate and find him. And of course, he does not get along, at least not at first. He's the Power Ranger equivalent of Cable, and considering everything he's sacrificed, what a disappointment to discover that the heirs apparent to the Nova Stones are a bunch of randos from across the universe. There's also something super familiar to him about Lucky, our Red Ranger, and when Phoenix Knight figures it out, it becomes a major point of conflict. After all, it begs one terrible question: has he saved the future, or simply put it into motion? As for his identity, I would be totally open to making him an original character, or if it didn't feel too pandery, explore the idea of making him Adam Park. Because Adam is an amazing character with lineage, and Johnny Young Bosch, I hear, is a sweetheart, and he's a personal fave. And yes, for those curious, I would keep the Q-let element, but spin it in that Alpha doesn't know how to recharge the Nova Stones just yet, as they're from the future after all. Ergo, they must be used sparingly, for now, because to me, that is the true magic of Power Rangers. One big, impossible story that continually inherits desperate elements and attempts to say yes to as many of them as possible. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society and fellow Ranger fans everywhere, Power Rangers Supernova is my first pass. An attempt to pick up the baton and dare to do something different with the franchise. Thank you all for spending your time listening. Now on with the show.
All right, welcome back, everybody. That was very extensive. I wasn't expecting that when when we reached out and talked. I said, let's just kind of come up with some basic ideas. That was really thorough. You're putting me on the spot here to do anything similar.
Oh no, I didn't intend to do that. I'm just, like I said, I really love this stuff, and it's hard not to get excited.
It's obvious, from the video, from just kind of the idea and the structure of everything, that this is really well thought out, that this could easily have been another season. I could easily see this, and I kind of want to see this, to be honest.
Oh, that's very kind, but yeah, maybe someday.
So where do you see it going? We kind of covered the first episode, we covered the characters. Where do you see sort of the turmoil and the arc that these Rangers will have to go through? I know you had kind of a Green Lantern parallax thing with our main character, with our Red. And what exactly do you see the show doing that maybe hasn't been done before, or how that kind of culminates?
One of the things that really makes me so attracted to Kyuranger and its raw potential, or at least what footage is available, is so much of it is defined by the relationships between the Rangers themselves, right? And if anything, you're so fascinated in love with the designs of the suits and certainly the mecha, that to some extent, the villains take a back seat, right? Like the villains, at least for the first dozen episodes or whatever, they're entirely inconsistent. And honestly, they're just there.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of room to play and a lot of potential to really grow out the 12 Rangers and make that the sole focus of the show. Because when you take 12 incredibly different folks from across the galaxy and stuff them into a spaceship, I think there's a lot of room there between the mix of their personalities to bake in all of the comedy and all of the conflict outside of the main villainy, of course. It just becomes so inherently interesting because they're as much roommates as they are teammates. I just think there's a lot of room for danger and trouble and peril interpersonally. So for me, a lot of the show would be around them as a team growing together, growing as individuals. That would certainly be interesting, if only because we've got such a huge cast, which we've never seen before in Rangers, right? At least not a cast of Rangers that is 12 deep. It's so massive, and it's super exciting. So I think that would be very, very interesting. There are the story elements, of course, that bake into that, but I think there's also a lot of room to bring in so many other elements of the universe into the show. So lots of villain characters that are not necessarily even consistent in design, but are speaking to a much bigger kind of villainy movement throughout the universe. So you've got all these characters that are effectively visually distinct, but ultimately running the same banner and trying to make this empire a thing, right? So it'd be fun to see the Rangers try to come together as much as it would be to see the villains actually trying to come together.
Are you familiar with Go-Go Sentai Bokenger? One of the
a little bit, yeah.
The Operation Overdrive counterpart.
Yeah.
They kind of did that, and I know Operation Overdrive did it, but not to the extent that we saw in the original series. But in the intro, you have all of these like different groups and sects of villains. A lot of times there will be like a treasure that they're going after, and like the Sentai team will show up and they're like, oh, we got to get that treasure. And then like the villain's like, no, it's my treasure. And then another villain will come in and be like, no, I'm going to fight you. And those two end up fighting. And then the Bokengers are like, what do we do? Like you could even have something like that.
So it's interesting that you say that. So once upon a time, back in my Blizzard days, one of the things that really stood out with World of Warcraft was factionalization, right? So you had like the Horde and the Alliance, right? Or a more modern expression would be like Overwatch and Talon.
Sure.
That is fascinating to me, especially if you could find a way to make it work for Rangers. I think there's something super cool about the idea of the Rangers flying the, sort of the Supernova banner, which is that star with the orbit shape kind of breaking off of it. And then right now in the pitch, as I presented it, the Monstar Syndicate could easily be its own factionalization with kind of that claw-looking icon that you see in the original footage. I think it'd be so cool to find a way to get fans excited about the villains in a comparable way. Not necessarily that they're rooting for them, but maybe there's a little dark part of them that is kind of in the way like Star Wars does, right? Like there's definitely people that align themselves with the Rebels, and there's definitely people that align themselves with the Empire. And so I think a little bit of that factionalization could really do wonders in mixing things up for Power Rangers. And I'd love to see if we could bake it into that version of the show.
Damn Kylo Ren stands. But no, this is a wonderful pitch. I think, like very basic to an extent. It's got, a good like little drops here and there of nostalgia for people who are super fascinated by the lore, which I think Power Rangers had going for it, but then moving to the individual seasons, it's kind of hard to distinguish that, and some people can make it work, some people can't, and well, don't go anywhere. We will be right back, and I will try to finish this and we will pitch the other side of it. Don't go anywhere.
Cool.
Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk Toku. If you're just joining us, I'm here with Jason Bischoff, who was working with the Power Rangers, especially Beast Morphers, as creative and kind of adapting that to where it became and where it went to today. And we decided to take on the maybe impossible task of how to adapt another season that may never be, which is Kyuranger. I know I got the Jew-Oger stuff on, but for yours, we went some places. I think it's a really cool idea. I think it's very fleshed out, and I think it has a lot of possibilities that you could put it into different writers' hands, and they could come up with different character pieces, especially Blaze and Roxy, like bringing them back in. Oh, I love it.
I love those two.
So what I was thinking for Kyuranger is it would be really interesting, kind of like your faction idea, where you have these group of heroes that have to work together and have to figure out how to work together. You have your enemies and your villains also working together, but maybe on my side of the coin, instead of them learning how to work together, what if they previously did work together, but now they all have their own motives, their own things? And that kind of got the gears turning a little bit, where whenever I thought of Kyuranger, I always think of, and this may sound really weird, I always think of Willy Wonka, to have this idea that there is this sort of power that everybody in the universe, everybody has heard of these rumors that if you can, be strong enough, you would be able to join and get these powers to fight. And of course, that maybe somebody, could achieve this power, even though, it's been years, nothing's ever come of it. And that's where we meet our main character, who is the last Earthling. Earth has been destroyed. You find out by the end.
Like the very last Earthling?
The very last one. And he's basically had to go into space, or he was already in space. I only had a commercial break to figure this out. But he's basically in space, and he has gathered these other people who are these warriors, these people that, because they have this energy and this sort of power inside of them, they're able to harness it and become these heroes of legend. And they travel across, basically liberating, basically saving these planets and these people from this army, from this group in power. And sometimes they can instill that courage, that power. And like if you've seen Kyuranger, we have the Blue Ranger, who basically has this Q-Tama, and he becomes the power of it. He would find that, he would unlock that in himself as well, and it would kind of grow as it goes along. But all of it leading to the idea that they aren't the first people to have acquired these powers, or there are so many of them out in the galaxy that there are other people who have acquired these powers. And the first people that had them would be our villains. They would almost be like the A squad from SPD of our Rangers. The better, stronger, better, bigger versions of these heroes that we follow. And they would all work together. Sometimes they would all have their own kind of thing, and it's up to our team to come together. And I think that'd be a really cool idea. Maybe even have like the original Red Ranger come back as Ho-Oh Soldier, the Phoenix, and kind of lead the team with a different idea, because he's fought these people, he's worked with these people, and he has a different idea, and they kind of have to counter steer him back. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this episode. Jason, it would be so cool to have you come back and we maybe talk about Zyuohger.
I've got some great ideas. Let me go start working on a video. I'll be right back.
Awesome. So hopefully, we could do something like that in the future. But I just want to thank you again. Thank you so much for giving us this hour, and kind of diving into what makes an adaptation, what kind of things should go into that. It's really, really important.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. Thank you again for having me on, and thanks everybody for listening.